So when we think about language loss and language decline and language endangerment, we have to kind of think, well, what causes that, right? Where's the problem there? And what you have, we like to talk about sometimes, the way I like to explain it is push and pull factors. That's kind of a model we sometimes use in linguistics. And what we're talking about there is pull factors are sort of things that sort of incentivize people to switch their language. Like, for example, you want to speak your native language, but all the jobs are primarily in English. That would be a pull factor. A push factor is sort of more like something that coercively pushes people away from their language. So, for example, here in Alaska, during the mid-20th century, there were a lot of residential boarding schools. And so these were schools where native people were taken to, native children, and forced to speak English typically and not speak their native language. And in fact, in some cases could be punished quite severely for speaking their native language and certainly told that it was shameful. And so you had a group of people who considered it shameful who were punished into thinking that was shameful. So that affected, especially for some native groups, affected sort of people's willingness to speak the language once they got out of there, right? There's trauma associated with it. And so that's what I'm talking about a push factor. And things like that, as well as other things, again, like job factors or a variety of other practices, can cause generational language gaps where parents aren't actively using it with their children. Brennig reading with the Haida language talked about this a little bit, right? Parents that felt like they, as she kind of eloquently puts it, sort of either save the language or save the kids, right? So they felt like the kids would have better economic opportunities if they learned to speak English, so they would have their kids speak English in the home, which is typically where they would be picking up the native language best, right? So if they were mainly getting English at home, then it causes potentially a generational language gap, right? And so then if you have kids that are growing up not fluent, and then it becomes a lot harder for them, even if their kids, now we're getting into third generation, even if they grow up and then want to teach their kids, native Haida, it becomes a lot harder if their parents never sort of fully taught them Haida to begin with. So you sometimes get these generational language gaps, and it's in those gaps that we often have to do things like a linguist coming into a community and trying to work with elders and trying to get language classes going, like what the reading described. Other kinds of push and pull factors, predominantly English-speaking schools. There are exceptions. The reading talked about, for example, like a pre-K and a Head Start and a kindergarten where Haida language is being used partially, which is fantastic and awesome. And there's definitely things like that around the state that are happening as far as classes or different things in villages that are being done in native languages, and that's fantastic. And you certainly have, for example, some Yupik villages where that's still the primary language, is the native language. But overwhelmingly so, public school education in Alaska is very strongly done in English typically. And with that, people have a really, really strong, you could call that both a push and a pull factor, to switch into using English for a large chunk of their day. So at that point, even if their parents are using it at home, they're spending a lot of their day speaking in English and a lot of their day doing homework that has to be conveyed in English. And it may be that their parents are kind of speaking some of both, but as you can see, that at that point you're getting most of your language instruction in English rather than in a native language. You have mass media, of course, whether that's, watching some people doing, filming video games on Twitch. I'm cool. I know what Twitch is. Or whether that is, just watching some TV. Either way, a lot of times this is in English. There have been efforts to arrest that, and to change that, and there's definitely a vibrant tradition of native filmmakers and native authors. Even here on the peninsula, people like Peter Kalifornsky several decades ago who would often write in Dena'ina as often as he would write in English. So we definitely have stuff like that. But overwhelmingly, our sort of entertainment structure in the United States is predominantly English. Definitely not, sort of predominantly Inupiaq or predominantly Dena'ina. And so there's that effect. Again, you got to think about all the different places in which people, especially young people, absorb their language tendencies. And mass media, more and more, kids spend a lot of their day in front of a TV screen. Or some kind of a screen. Computer screen, whatever the case may be. And then again, jobs being in English or whatever the other trade language would be, depending on the case, Spanish for much of Latin America. Now, I'm going to pause there.